Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
The room was cold, filled with the low hum of energy conduits that crisscrossed the walls, casting dim blue light. Encircled by hulking figures, a man sat in the center of the alien war council. His arms were bound with shimmering, energy-infused cuffs, holding him in place, but it didn't seem to bother him. He smiled, a thin, mocking expression that never reached his cold eyes. He wasn't intimidated, despite the aliens towering over him. If anything, he was amused. "You call that a war?" he asked, voice dripping with derision. "We call that a warm-up." The alien soldiers flinched. Veterans of countless galactic conflicts, they had expected this human to cower in the presence of the Zarkani, a race notorious for their brutality. But he didn't seem frightened. The chains rattled as he shifted slightly, looking up at his captors. "I fought in the siege of Xantar 7, growled one of the younger warriors, his scales gleaming under the sparse light. "We crushed 3 battalions of your Earth forces in less than a cycle." The human tilted his head, his grin widening. "You crushed us, huh? Is that what they told you?" The alien narrowed his eyes but said nothing. The man's smile remained steady as he continued. "We let you in, kid. Ever wonder why none of your assault force came back? You didn't break through our defenses. We opened the gates for you, gave you a false sense of victory." The Zarkani warrior stiffened, his fists clenching. Around the human, the other alien soldiers shifted uncomfortably. The elder of the group, General Torvac, stepped forward, his crimson scales shimmering. His deep voice echoed through the chamber. "Your tactics mean nothing to us, human. You've been captured. Your species is scattered. The war is over." The human's smile didn't waver. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you've won? This isn't over. You've never fought humans when we're truly backed into a corner. That's when the real fight starts." One of the younger aliens snarled. "Empty threats. You're weak. Your kind was easily routed at the Battle of Korath." A low chuckle escaped the human's lips. "Oh, you mean that little skirmish at Korath? Let me tell you something about Korath. You didn't win there either. We pulled back on purpose. Left the place rigged with enough explosives to turn your fleet into scrap metal. You didn't defeat us. You survived. Barely." Torvac's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, towering over the human. "You speak boldly for someone in chains, human. What's to stop me from crushing you right here?" "Go ahead," the man replied nonchalantly, tilting his head up to meet Torvac's gaze. "I'm just one of many. Kill me, and you'll only speed up your own demise. We've been planning this since the start." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Torvac growled, his patience wearing thin. "You think you can scare us with your words? We have dominated worlds, erased entire species from existence. You are but a remnant of a broken race." The human's smile finally faded, his eyes darkening as he spoke softly. "You think you fought the worst of us? You've only seen the surface. Humans, we adapt. We evolve. We don't just fight with guns and bombs. We fight with our minds, with strategy. And we never fight fair." Torvac straightened, his fists clenched tightly as he spoke. "Enough of this. Take him back to his cell. We've wasted enough time with his lies." As 2 of the Zarkani soldiers approached, the human spoke again, his voice calm but edged with something darker. "I wonder if you've noticed it yet. How long has it been since you received a transmission from your command centers?" The 2 soldiers hesitated, looking toward Torvac for guidance. The general scowled, motioning them to proceed, but he couldn't shake the nagging thought the human had planted. It had been too long since they'd heard from high command. But it couldn't be sabotage. Torvac's suspicions were confirmed when alarms blared through the ship. The lights flickered, and the floor trembled underfoot as the hum of the engines shifted into an ominous growl. The Zarkani soldiers exchanged glances, their rigid discipline faltering as they realized something was terribly wrong. "What did you do?" Torvac demanded, his voice a mixture of fury and unease. The human's grin returned, broader this time. "Me? I didn't do anything. Your warships, your fleets, they're not coming. We've already made sure of that. You thought you had us surrounded, but you walked right into our trap. Torvac's eyes widened, his fist tightening around the hilt of his blade. Lies! Another tremor rocked the ship, and this time, the sound of metal screeching against metal reverberated through the room. The Zarkani soldiers stiffened as the realization dawned on them. They were being boarded. "Your time's up," the human whispered, leaning back in his chair as he listened to the chaos unfolding. "And now you're going, to learn what it really means to fight humans." Before Torvac could respond, the doors to the chamber exploded inward with a deafening roar. Through the smoke and debris, figures emerged. Humans, clad in tactical armor, weapons raised, their eyes cold and determined. They didn't hesitate. They never did. As the Zarkani soldiers scrambled to defend themselves, the human still chained to the chair smiled again. "You thought you were hunting us. Turns out we were just waiting for the right moment." The chaos in the room was immediate. The Zarkani soldiers, previously so sure of their victory, were now scrambling to react to the sudden breach. Smoke filled the air, and the sharp hiss of energy weapons discharging cut through the confusion. Human soldiers poured into the room, moving with the precision of a well-rehearsed strike team. Torvac bellowed commands, but it was clear that his forces were caught completely off guard. His soldiers had grown complacent, their confidence in their superiority shattered by the suddenness of the human assault. The hulking alien general turned, eyes blazing with fury, his gaze locking onto the chained human still sitting in the center of the room, untouched by the violence unfolding around him. "You planned this," Torvac snarled, storming toward him. His massive hand grabbed the human by the throat, lifting him effortlessly from the chair. "How?" The human's smile didn't waver, even as Torvac's grip tightened. "It was simple, really. We let you think you were in control. You Zarkani are so predictable, big, brutal, but not exactly subtle. You thought you could just waltz in, capture a few humans, and that would be the end of it." He grunted as Torvac's hand constricted further, but his eyes remained steady, unblinking. "But you underestimated us. We were always 10 steps ahead of you." Before Torvac could respond, a sharp crack rang out, and the general stumbled backward, his hand releasing its grip on the human's throat. He roared in pain, clutching his side where a bullet had pierced through his dense, armored scales. A human sniper, positioned at the entrance, had taken the shot, and now Torvac was bleeding, something the Zarkani weren't used to. The human soldier responsible for the shot stepped forward, weapon still trained on Torvac. Her voice was calm, authoritative. "You're outmatched, alien. Surrender now, and maybe we'll let you live." Torvac growled, but before he could make a move, the human in chains spoke again, his voice almost mocking. "I wouldn't push it, Torvac. She's not bluffing. Humans, we don't offer second chances." Torvac glared at the human, then at the woman standing before him, but the realization had already sunk in. His forces were overwhelmed. The Zarkani pride in brute strength had left them unprepared for the cunning and ruthlessness of their human adversaries. With a snarl of defeat, Torvac barked an order to his remaining soldiers. "Stand down." The alien soldiers hesitated, confusion and fear in their eyes. But slowly, they lowered their weapons. Around them, the human strike team moved swiftly, rounding up the disarmed Zarkani with cold efficiency. It was over, and Torvac knew it. The human, still chained, chuckled softly. "I told you, General. You never fought humans when we were really fighting to win." The female soldier stepped forward, unlocking the energy cuffs with a quick flick of her wrist. The man rubbed his wrists, shaking off the stiffness as he stood, stretching his arms like a man waking from a long nap. "Thanks for the rescue, Captain," he said with a grin. "Took you long enough." She gave him a sidelong glance, her expression unreadable beneath the visor of her helmet. "We had to wait for the right moment. Couldn't risk blowing the op. But now, it's time to get out of here." Her eyes flicked toward Torvac, who was still being restrained by two of her soldiers. "And what do we do with him?" The man looked at Torvac, his smile fading. "He's not a problem anymore. We've already won." Torvac bared his fangs. "You haven't won anything, human. Your forces are scattered. Your world's in ruin. We will rebuild. And when we do, we'll crush your species for good." The human stepped forward, his expression hardening. "You don't get it, do you? This was never about winning battles. It's about showing you what happens when you push us too far. Torvac's eyes gleamed with hatred, but he said nothing. He knew deep down that the human was right. The Zarkani had always fought with brute strength, believing it to be enough. But humans, they were different. They fought with their minds, their instincts, and above all, their relentless determination. You think we're broken, that you've won because you managed to capture a few of us, the human continued, his voice steady. But you're not fighting soldiers anymore. You're fighting survivors. And survivors? We don't give up. We don't back down. We adapt. He glanced at the human soldiers who were preparing for their extraction, then back at Torvac. You see, General, this war was over the moment you underestimated us. And now you're going to see what happens when humans decide they've had enough. Torvac's lip curled in a snarl, but the human didn't wait for a response. He turned to the female captain and nodded. Let's move. The team began to file out, the tension in the air thick with the unspoken finality of the encounter. As they left the chamber, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the corridors. The human soldiers had already set charges, preparing to leave the Zarkani ship in ruins. Torvac, still restrained by the human soldiers, watched them go, fury and helplessness warring in his chest. For the first time in his long career as a warlord, he felt fear, not of the human strength, but of their minds, their cold, calculated cruelty, the lengths they would go to win. The human in chains paused at the door, glancing back one last time at the defeated general. You thought you were fighting warriors, he said softly, but you were fighting something far worse. With that, he disappeared into the smoke, leaving Torvac and his soldiers in the silence of their impending doom. Torvac's heart pounded in his chest as the humans disappeared into the smoke, their chilling words echoing in his mind. He could hear the distant rumble of explosions as the human strike team planted charges throughout the ship. The Zarkani warlord's mind raced, desperate to find a way to salvage what was left of his pride and his forces. You were fighting something far worse, the human's words repeated in his thoughts, gnawing at the edges of his confidence. For centuries, the Zarkani had crushed all who stood before them with their sheer strength and brutality. But this was different. The humans hadn't just fought. They had outthought, outmaneuvered, and outlasted the Zarkani at every turn. And now, Torvac could feel the weight of his species' inevitable defeat. He snarled, trying to shake off the paralyzing fear that threatened to consume him. He was a warlord of the Zarkani, a conqueror. He would not bow to these humans. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had already lost. The sound of boots echoed through the chamber as one of his lieutenants approached, his expression grim. General, the lieutenant began, voice trembling. The humans, they're sabotaging the ship. Our systems are failing. We need to abandon. Before he could finish, another explosion rocked the ship, sending the lieutenant stumbling. The lights flickered, and the sound of metal screeching under the pressure of the blasts filled the air. The ship was coming apart. Torvac stood, wrenching his arms free from the soldiers restraining him. His eyes blazed with fury, but there was a hollowness behind them now, a desperate, sinking feeling that no amount of bravado could mask. He had been bested, and there was nothing he could do to stop the humans from destroying everything. Prepare the escape pods, Torvac bellowed, his voice filled with rage. We'll retreat and regroup. This isn't over. His remaining soldiers scrambled to obey, rushing to the ship's escape pods as the destruction continued to tear through the vessel. But Torvac knew, in his heart, that his words were empty. The Zarkani weren't retreating to regroup. They were fleeing. He marched toward the nearest escape pod, his mind churning with fury and shame. He would live to fight another day, if only to make the humans pay for what they had done. But as he stepped into the pod, sealing the hatch behind him, a sinking realization washed over him. They would never let him live long enough for revenge. The pod launched into the void of space, and as the stars stretched before him, Torvac caught a final glimpse of his warship, the pride of the Zarkani fleet, crumbling in the distance. The explosions rippled across its hull, and in moments the ship was nothing more than debris, scattered like dust against the backdrop of the galaxy. Torvac slammed his fists against the pod's controls, rage bubbling over. How had it come to this? How had a species as fragile as humans managed to bring the Zarkani to their knees? But deep down, he knew the answer. It wasn't strength or numbers that had given the humans victory. It was their unrelenting will. They fought with a ferocity that the Zarkani could not understand, a ruthless determination to survive at any cost. And in the end, that was what had defeated them. On the other side of the ship, the human strike team moved with swift precision, extracting their captive and retreating to their own ship. The former prisoner, still rubbing his wrists where the energy cuffs had once bound him, glanced back at the destruction unfolding behind them. The Zarkani ship was in its death throes, flames and debris filling the void as it collapsed in on itself. "That was satisfying," the prisoner remarked, his voice dripping with amusement. "I was starting to think you'd never show up." The captain, her face still hidden beneath the visor of her helmet, gave him a sidelong glance. "We were always coming. Just had to let you play your part," he grinned. "Well, I hope I put on a good show for our hosts." They seemed captivated. "You did well," the captain replied, her voice cool and professional. "But this isn't over yet. The Zarkani might be scattered, but they'll regroup. They always do." The man shrugged, leaning back against the bulkhead as their ship's engines roared to life. "Let them. We'll be ready for them. We always are." The captain nodded, turning her attention to the crew as they began their departure. As the ship pulled away from the wreckage, the prisoner closed his eyes, letting out a long breath. It was over, for now. But he knew, deep in his bones, that this war was far from finished. Far away on the Zarkani homeworld, the news of the defeat reached the highest levels of command. The Council of Warlords, gathered in their towering citadel, stood in stunned silence as the report was delivered. Their forces, their fleet, had been decimated by the humans. The once mighty Zarkani were no longer invincible. One of the warlords, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, growled in frustration, his fists clenched at his sides. "How did this happen?" he demanded. "How did a race so primitive defeat us?" The council exchanged uneasy glances, but no one had an answer. The Zarkani had always relied on their strength, their brutality to conquer. They had never faced an enemy like the humans, an enemy who fought with their minds as much as with their weapons. "Prepare the remaining fleets," the elder warlord finally said, his voice cold and unyielding. "We will not let this stand. We will crush the humans and erase them from the galaxy." But even as he spoke, there was doubt in his eyes. The humans had shown them something they had never seen before, an unbreakable will, a refusal to surrender. And for the first time in their long, bloody history, the Zarkani were afraid. As the human ship disappeared into the darkness of space, the former prisoner sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the stars. The war wasn't over, not yet, but he knew one thing for certain: the Zarkani would never be the same again. They had learned what it meant to fight humans, and next time, they would think twice before underestimating them. For now, though, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. They had won this round, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The humans always adapted, and no matter how many times the Zarkani came for them, they would be ready, because when it came to war, the humans were just getting started. The end.